rising, has been falling as the upper income shares have been rising. The upper income shares in Europe correspond to about an alpha of 3, in the US to about an alpha of 1.5. And that's a very natural measure of inequality at the top end of the income distribution, right? And I'm not actually going to go through this calculation because I think that you actually had to do this in a couple of problem sets already. But if you calculate what is the value of the average of income among people who earn more than $1 million, it is alpha over alpha minus 1 times $1 million. And so then if you say what's I bar 10 to the 6th over I bar 10 to the 6th minus 10 to the 6th, you can multiply, you have alpha over alpha minus 1, alpha over alpha minus 1 minus 1. So you can divide through by 10 to the 6th. And then you multiply through by alpha minus 1, cancel, and you get that it's just alpha, right? And so why did I call that coefficient alpha? Because it's exactly what comes out of the Pareto distribution, right? So therefore, alpha is approximately 1.5 in the US, about 3 in Europe, with elasticities of 0.1, 0.3, 0.5, and 1. That would give us taxes of about 87%, 69%, 57%, and 47% on the rich, respectively. On the other hand, we computed that for the same elasticities, for the population as an average, it would be about 67%, 48%, 38%, and 26%. So that suggests that if the poor and the rich, if most people and the rich are equally elastic, then we should have progressive taxes, significantly progressive, with rates rising by quite a bit. Roughly the same progressivity, by the way, that's in the US system. So elasticities, the relative elasticities of the rich and the poor are obviously going to be crucial for this. But this gives us a first sense that probably, especially in the United States, where there's so much more inequality at the top than in the rest of the distribution, there should probably be progressive taxes, and increasingly so, given how much inequality at the top is rising, even though inequality in the rest of the distribution is staying the same. Whereas in Europe, if you were to plug 3 into here, you would have 1 over 1/3 plus 1/3 plus, say, 1. And you would get 25% would be the optimal tax for the rich. So that would lead to a flat tax, basically, in Europe, if there was same elasticity among the rich and the rest. So Europe should probably be not so progressive. The US should probably be pretty progressive, which is a little bit the opposite of what's going on right now. US is progressive, probably about this, but Europe is much more progressive. Now, evidence on elasticities is pretty extensive, but it's complex to interpret. So almost all the evidence we have is based on short-term changes. It's based on like, oh, this year the taxes were different than they were last year. How much more revenue did we get? Or maybe for a few years, but not much more than that. Now, on the one hand, this could, and the thing that people usually measure is what's called the elasticity of taxable income. Elasticity of taxable income is how much income do you report in the end. Not how many hours are you working. That's like hard for us to observe, and it's not necessarily a relevant thing. But how much does the income that you report earning change when we change the taxes? Now, this could bias things upwards relative to what we really care about. Because if people can shift their income back and forth between years, if there's a year when there's low taxes, people are not going to report as much income, right? Because they're going to report more income that year and less income in another year, because they're just going to claim that they earn the income earlier so that they can pay lower taxes on it, right? On the other hand, this might be biased downward, because there might be things that are more durable. That's an example of sort of a storable. You've got to earn that income sometime. When are you going to earn it? But there are also durable things like if taxes were really high, maybe I'd leave my job as an investment banker to become an artist, right? And that might take me a few years. 1 year of high taxes might not be enough for me to make sense to leave my job as an investment banker, right? But if there are many years of higher taxes, that will affect me more. Okay, so the evidence indicates that the labor supply elasticity, if we actually measure how much they're working, it's very low, but the taxable income elasticity is very large over these short periods. for the rich. And Kentaro, why do you think that would be the case?
So I think there are ways to manipulate your reporting income.
Especially for the rich, right?
Yeah.
The rich can hire a lot of accountants and so forth to manipulate the years in which they earn income, right? On the other hand, so my guess is that for the rich, the right number for this like long-term real taxable income elasticity, this is my personal view, is around 0.3 at the highest and probably closer to 0.1. The reason I think that is that if you think about most people who are really successful, right, if you paid them a little bit less, they're probably not going to reduce by that much how hard they work. You know, most really wealthy people are incredibly ambitious, and they're going to be at the top of whatever social hierarchy you put them onto, regardless of how much you're paying them. And you sort of see that with CEOs. Like CEOs who run their own companies, right, are getting 100% of every dollar that they create, and they work their asses off. And CEOs who only get a little bit of equity, which is maybe 1/1000th of every dollar that they earn, also work their asses off. You don't see like CEOs just like relaxing, even though they're only getting 1/1000th of the value that they create with their work, right? Yeah, Andre.
Don't you think, like, if you think of Mark Zuckerberg,
Yeah.
if you jack up his tax rates, you just, I don't know, buy all his things through Facebook, since he's the CEO, he's the majority shareholder, and don't you create a lot of moral hazard in that situation?
Buy his things through Facebook?
Yeah, like, whatever, Jats, you do everything through Facebook instead of, like, through him as a...
Yeah, but that's not necessarily a loss because we earn taxes on the Facebook corporate income.
Yeah, so if he starts buying jets and like renting helicopters through Facebook, Facebook's profit reduces, and he earns less money and there's less tax both from him.
Well, I mean, look, we have monitoring for that reason. I mean, it's true. If people can evade taxes, that's going to create bad elasticities. But I think the right answer to that is to crack down on tax evasion rather than to, you know, I mean, you're not allowed to just like deduct any private expense you have, right? Like there's a reason why we have tax enforcement, right? So I think that's a reason that if you have high taxes, you'd want to have a lot of enforcement. But I don't think it's a reason why you wouldn't want to tax people.
This is not exactly a tax, evasion, right? In like in an illegal sense. It
Well,
might be bad for the minority shareholders and stuff, but
it is an evasion if you're using it for personal consumption. I mean, there are strict rules about what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. You can't just expense anything. I mean, it may not be that well enforced, but it could be better enforced, right? So, I mean, look, if you were the head of a company, you wouldn't say, oh, I need to give my a huge amount of equity to my shareholders because otherwise they're going to just abuse their expense accounts to no end, right? I mean, you enforce that stuff and you make sure that people don't abuse expense accounts to no end. And the government should do the same thing. You know, effectively, your deductions through the company are just expense account that the government is running, right? And the government should put the same amount of time that companies do into making sure that people don't abuse those expense accounts. Okay, so the middle class, on the other hand, the evidence that we have suggests, at least in this short-term way, that labor supply and taxable income elasticity are both about 0.5. The middle class have a lot less opportunities for like shifting tax across time, and so that makes their labor supply elasticity much closer to their taxable income elasticity. And most of this elasticity comes from women in married couples deciding whether to work or not. So what that would suggest, if you plug in those numbers, is that average income taxes should be about 40%, which is significantly higher than we currently have, but not gigantic. Whereas for the wealthy, they should be about 80%. So that would have them rising much, much higher, very progressive, right? So one possible reaction you can have to this is that we should completely change our tax code and that we should have much higher taxes. That's sort of the reaction that Emmanuel Saez has. Another reaction is that this analysis is totally wrong. Now, one relatively superficial way in which this analysis could be totally wrong is that we could have the wrong numbers for the labor supply elasticity. It could be much larger than it really is. And some people argue that that's the case because of long-term factors, like people might go into a different career if it wasn't that the people who do the best actually end up earning a lot more money. Another long-term factor could be that when I'm young, one reason I work hard is not just to earn money then, but to advance in my career. And I wouldn't value advancing in my career if I didn't think I would make a lot of money when I advance in my career. Now, I don't really buy into that stuff, especially for the wealthy, because I think that they're all going to climb to the top of the totem pole regardless. But that is an argument that some people make. I think that even those types of arguments get really undermined if you think about having richer policies to deal with taxation. So remember, ideally we'd like to redistribute based on ability rather than based on income, because that wouldn't discourage people from working, right? Unfortunately, we have to use the income tax because we can't directly observe people's ability and therefore potential earnings, right? But we can also often get a partial sense of what they could potentially earn without directly observing their incomes. Because there's lots of traits that people have that they can't easily change that predict them earning a high income. Prashank, what are some examples of traits like that? That people couldn't change that would predict them earning a lot of income?
Intelligence. I think Banshee did a study on heights.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
They can't escape heights of some sort.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing that actually does a fantastic job predicting people's earnings is how patient they are as children. So if people as children are willing to give up one cookie now for 2 cookies in an hour, they're likely to earn something like 3 times the income of someone who is not willing to wait an hour to get the extra cookie. Yeah, Chrissy.
And whatever study covers this, do they control for parental success or anything like that? But I can't help but think that parents who
I think that they do control for that, but it's highly correlated with that. But even once you control, it's the thing that's driving it, not the parent's success, controlling for that. That's the idea. I mean, parental success still has some independent effect, but beauty has a huge effect on earnings. There's IQ. And by the way, beauty might sound like it's in the eye of the beholder. That's complete BS. There are very easy ways to quantify how beautiful someone is without any human looking at it at all. There's just things about the shape of the face and things about the symmetry of the face that just quantify how beautiful someone is, and that account for 90% of the variation in how beautiful people looking at them think they are. So it's just not true that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There is probably some amount that's in the eye of the beholder, but only 10%. So IQ is another thing like this. Health, race and ethnicity, disability, and unemployment status are things that are pretty hard for people to change, or they're unlikely to change. So by taxing these, we can avoid taxing these or giving transfers to people based on these, we can avoid discouraging work. And this was the principle behind Akerlof's 1978 paper on tagging. And it's a crucial but controversial principle in taxation. And one particularly nice analysis of this was based on taxing height. So it turns out this is a strong but imperfect but strong predictor of wages. And so